Foundational Black Americans or FBA is a term coined by Tariq Nasheed to describe the black descendants of American slaves. Tariq often describes foundational Black American as a lineage, but this is incorrect. What is a lineage? Let's break down the word lineage, line. A lineage is a direct line of ancestry. I'll say that again, a direct line of ancestry. In order to be members of the same lineage, you must share the same ancestry. The main problem with calling FBA a lineage is the fact that not all members within the group are directly related to each other. Africans were brought over in multiple slave ships to the Americas from 1619 all the way to 1860. The people brought over were from multiple countries across a period of over 2 centuries, unless the Europeans made sure that every African they captured belonged to the same line of ancestry. Those captors were not all of one lineage. Your lineage is your birthright. It doesn't change because your conditions or geographic location changes. Let me make it even more simple. The child of a slave brought over from Nigeria in the year 1619 according to Tariq is FBA, but so would the child of a slave brought over from Sierra Leone in 1820. These two hypothetical individuals, by definition, do not belong to the same lineage, but according to Tariq they're both FBA, but they don't belong to the same lineage. This problem is expanded even further if, as Tariq claims, most FBA individuals are indigenous to the Americas. Luckily for Tariq, this is a non-issue because FBA people are indeed mostly African. Calling it a lineage is Tariq's attempt to escape from his Africanity. If you want to be accurate, call it what it is. Foundational Black American is not defined by lineage, it is defined by ancestral condition and location. Earlier I stated that foundational Black Americans are mostly African. In previous videos I have demonstrated that foundational Black Americans are not indigenous to the Americas, but I didn't demonstrate that they were African. Well, where is the evidence for that? A paper by Howe et al. 2010 measured the genetic distance between various individuals' autosomal DNA. What you are looking at right now is a PCA plot. Each dot represents a person and the distance between the dots represents individuals. The black dots represent African Americans and the red dots represent Africans. As you can see, the black cluster overlaps with the red cluster. You can clearly see some of the African Americans are closer to Africans than to other African Americans. You could just say this is evidence that foundational Black Americans are closely related to Africans because they still form their own cluster, but this explanation fails. The foundational Black Americans cluster is indeed separating from the African cluster, but the direction in which cluster is moving indicates one of two things. Either foundational Black Americans are evolving into Europeans, or the cluster was formed as a result of interbreeding between Africans and Europeans. Considering that evolution prohibits populations from evolving into already existing populations, the logical conclusion is that the foundational Black American cluster is the result of Africans interbreeding with Europeans. The Native American cluster is exactly what we'd expect to see if foundational Black Americans were just a closely related population to Africans. The Native American cluster is separating itself from the East Asian cluster in a direction that doesn't move it closer to other clusters. This graph completely debunks the notion that African Americans are anything other a population of Africans with European admixture. This study just looks at autosomal DNA, which is biparental. What about uniparental DNA? Uniparental DNA is DNA that can only be given by one parent. The prime examples of this are the Y chromosome, also known as Y-DNA, and the mitochondrial genome, also known as mtDNA. There has been a number of studies confirming that African Americans' mtDNA and Y-DNA haplogroups are the same as those found commonly within Africa. Johnson et al. 2015 included 343 African Americans' mtDNA and found that 85.71% belonged to the haplogroups L0, L1, L2, L3 or L4, which are haplogroups with a high prevalence in sub-Saharan Africa. Lid et al. 2007 included 93 African American males and found 80 individuals of mtDNA belonging to the haplogroups of L0, L1, L2, or L3. The same study found that 70 of the males belong to Y-DNA haplogroups with a high prevalence in Africa. Sickle cell anemia has its highest occurrence in sub-Saharan Africans. 75% of cases worldwide occur in sub-Saharan Africa. If foundational black Americans are really recently descended from Africans, it is expected that African Americans should carry the allele for the disease in high numbers, and that is exactly what we observe. 1 in 12 foundational black Americans are carriers of the allele, causing sickle cell anemia. An allele of the gene APL1 associated with kidney failure is common when we look at genetic disorders common in people native to the continent of Africa. This allele conveys a benefit as well. It provides immunity to a disease carried by the tsetse fly. This fly is only found in Africa. It wouldn't make sense for a trait to evolve and propagate in a population that doesn't come in contact with this fly. OCAR2 is a genetic disorder resulting in albinism. It has a high occurrence in Africa, and as expected it also has a high occurrence in African Americans. It is a guarantee that if a given genetic disorder is common in Africa, it will have a high prevalence in African Americans. This is not the exception, this is the rule. You are going to have a difficult time explaining this fact if you believe African Americans are native to anywhere outside of Africa.